Well, good morning, members of the Monday Study Group. This is my third attempt to make the video this morning. I am on my wife Michelle's computer. I have tried both other laptops that I have, my PC laptop and my old MacBook laptop, and neither of them would work to make the entire video. The PC stopped and just went blank and turned itself off in the middle of making the video, halfway through. And when I went to the MacBook, that got started okay, but then the video kept pausing. So it seemed as if you were on the receiving end of that video, the video would be all chopped up. It would be, I'd be speaking and the video would be pausing, and then I'd be going on talking, which you could hear, but the video would stay static or the same. And it kept jumping in and out like that. So I canceled that one too, and now I'm on my third attempt to make this video, trying on Michelle's computer. She's gone and for a meeting, I think, in Coupeville. The food bank there is building a new building. Michelle's the treasurer, and she is in frequent meetings about the new building for the Coupeville food bank. Well, we are in Ignatius of Antioch's letter to the Trallians. Tralles was a small town east of Magnesia, which we said last week was south about 15 miles of Ephesus. So if you're thinking about a map and Ephesus is on the coast of modern-day Turkey, then Magnesia would be to the south and Tralles further to the east. Their bishop, the Trallian bishop, Polybius, had come to visit Ignatius as he was being held prisoner in Smyrna still, just as Onesimus had come representing the Ephesians and Damas had come representing the Magnesians. And so they are coming to visit and encourage Ignatius as he's on his way to martyrdom in the arena at Rome. Some of the themes in this letter to the Trallians are the same, as you discovered if you've read it, are the same as the ones we've run into already in the letters to the Ephesians and the Magnesians, and particularly the emphasis on obeying the bishop. We are not, I think, to be understanding the church this part of the world at this time as a strict hierarchy of cardinals, archbishops, bishops, local priests, and councils of elders assisting the local priest. In fact, the word priest is never mentioned. The bishop is functioning like a local church pastor more than like a bishop over a large region. So when we read the word bishop, we're not reading hierarchy so much into it as church order or structure. And that's because Ignatius believes that the best, most efficient way to assure Christian unity against the false teachings that are rampant during his time, particularly Docetism and Gnosticism, is obedience to the local church leader. That for him is the way most quickly to assure orthodoxy or Christian unity, is that they would act in submission to the bishop. Act, he says, in no way in chapter 2 without the bishop, and submit to the presbytery as to the apostles of Christ, and respect the deacons because they represent Christ. So he encourages the people in the local church at Tralles to live in accord with their local church leaders. In chapter 4, we get a little bit increased insight into the character of Ignatius, especially as he sees himself. He says that boasting is a problem for him. He must keep his limits, he says, lest boasting should be my undoing. He says he needs to be on his guard against flatterers. That is, people who come and tell him what a hero he is for being a martyr and for going to Rome to die for the faith. Those kind of people don't help him, he thinks, because he is tempted to believe them and to boast in his own status. Instead, what he needs, he says, is gentleness or meekness or humility. That's in the last sentence of chapter 4. He accuses himself of impetuous ambition, and it is a struggle for him to live with humility. It's good that he recognizes this about himself. So, chapter 5 was, in some ways, difficult for me to understand as a pastoral strategy. How is it possible that Ignatius thought I see it almost as belittling the Trallians in chapter 5. How is that helpful to him in his overall strategy of what he wants them to do in this letter? So he says that he is capable of writing them heavenly things, but he's afraid to harm them because they are mere babes, infants. Isn't that a kind of put down? I know Paul says it to the Corinthians, but there's grounds for that, yet he doesn't give grounds here. He says that he could teach them some things, but they would choke themselves on the food that he would feed them. He is critical of their immaturity. And he boasts that, it seems to me that he boasts, and this is partly, I think, why he's worried about his own character as someone who tends to boast. He boasts about grasping heavenly mysteries, the ranks of angels, the array of principalities, things visible and invisible. He does say in humility that it's not because of all these that he is a disciple. That's yet to be fully proved. But it is a kind of boasting. So chapter 5 was a bit of a conundrum to me in terms of the strategy that this writer has, Ignatius has, for writing to the Trallians. Would it help them that he does not think of them as mature and that he himself has boasted of these heavenly mysteries that he's capable of teaching but is not going to teach them? Well, I wasn't sure about that. So when I got to chapter 6, one of the members of our group this morning helped me understand that the claim of authority that Ignatius has in chapter 6, or in chapter 5, helps him communicate to the Trallians that he has the authority to urge them not to fall in line with false teaching, with heresy, with opinions that are contrary to the core teachings of the Christian faith. He tells them to use only Christian food, as this translation puts it, and to keep off foreign fare, by which I mean heresy. There are people who mingle Jesus Christ with their teaching, but they are teaching a false doctrine. So I think maybe, going back to chapter 5, the boasting of his own spiritual experiences and greater knowledge than the Trallians have prepares for chapter 6, in which he now would be understood by the Trallians to have the authority to teach what he does in chapter 6 about avoiding heresy and staying with orthodox core Christian teaching. At least that's one way of relating the two chapters. Now, in chapter 7, he says to them, be on your guard against such people who mingle Jesus Christ with their teaching, but they're not teaching the right thing. Keep close to the bishop. Keep very close to God and the bishop, he says, and the apostles' teaching. Whoever does anything without the bishop does not have a clear conscience. So again, how do you guard against false teaching? For Ignatius, that is to align yourself with the teaching of the local bishop. Again, that didn't always work in the history of Christianity, because there were eventually bishops who taught what came to be understood as false doctrine or inadequate teaching about who Christ was and how the Trinity was to be understood, and other matters of Christian doctrine that were considered to be core principles. So sometimes bishops themselves could err. But here, and at least in this early time, Ignatius thinks that adherence to and obedience to the local church leaders was the best way to avoid false teaching. Now, he's not worried, he says in chapter 8, about them. I haven't heard any such thing in your case. No, he is just encouraging them to be gentle, to be faithful, to be loving of one another. Let no one of you hold anything against his neighbor. And make sure that no one in the Trallian congregation acts in such a way as to cause Christianity to be scoffed at by outsiders, by non-Christians. In fact, my translation here in chapter 8 reads this way: do not give the heathen, that is the Gentiles, the Greek word is ethnicin, the outsiders, do not give them opportunities whereby God's people, that is the church, should be scoffed at through the stupidity of a few. That is, if there are Christians among the Trallians who are acting immorally or acting illegally or causing trouble, or just their personalities are causing conflict with insiders or outsiders, that would show outsiders that the Christians were not as spiritual as they claim to be, were not acting in an honorable way. So he urges them not to act in such a way to call attention to any bad behavior on the part of the Christian congregation. It's an evangelistic concern. He wants the outsiders to be attracted to Christianity, and that no Christian should act in such a way to cause ill repute. Of course, in our own time, there are plenty of Christians who act in such a way to cause ill repute to the Christian faith. In fact, it's in some areas, to call yourself a Christian would be to associate yourself with those who have negative actions with regard to our country, beliefs that would be harmful to other people. So in his own time, Ignatius is also worried about this, that Christianity would not have a bad reputation. It's also in the New Testament as well. So then we learn more about the false teaching he's worried about in chapter 9. He says, don't pay any attention to talk that ignores Jesus Christ, who was really born, really ate, really drank, really was persecuted, really crucified, died, and was really raised from the dead. What's he getting at here with these reallys? Well, he's saying that there are people who deny that Jesus was fully human, that he had a body that ate and drank and could suffer and die and be raised from the dead. And these people are the Docetists. We've talked about these people before. People who believed that Jesus only seemed to be human, but that the true Son of God could not have suffered and died and been a physical body in the way that everybody else, you and I, are physical. They come at this belief from a kind of Platonism that viewed the body as evil and the spirit or soul as good, and so applied that to the Son of God in his thinking, in Ignatius's thinking, that there should be a complete understanding that Jesus Christ was both fully human and divine. And this was the emerging Orthodox Christian position about who Jesus was. And the Docetists denied the humanity, not the divinity. They believed Jesus was the true Son of God, but that he wasn't fully human. And that was because of their presuppositions about the nature of the human body and of flesh and of the evil that's associated with matter. So this is a warning against Docetic Christians who seem to be Christian in Ignatius's view, but are really not. True Christians would affirm both the divinity, the deity, and the full humanity of Christ. Welcome back to Michelle, who has been at a meeting in Coupeville. And I'm using her computer because neither of my computers are working.
Oh, good. Okay.
So, on to chapter 10 then. He talks about some people as atheists, and that's actually in the Greek text. The Greek word is atheoi. Theos is the word for God. Theoi is the word for believers in God. And if you put an a or an in the front of it, you have atheoi, or atheist, or atheist, non-believers in God. And so he calls outsiders, and then he says, well, what I really mean is unbelievers, as is some atheists or unbelievers say, his suffering wasn't real, that is, was a sham, then why am I a prisoner? Why am I suffering for this belief? If you were right, I wouldn't be suffering at all. So he is telling these Trallian Christians that they need to remember that Jesus was fully human as well as divine, and that his suffering on the cross was a real suffering that the Son of God underwent on our behalf. He calls these people wicked offshoots in chapter 11. And it is, he says, through the cross and by Christ's suffering that he summons us who are his members. So, again, this is all a part of his urging them to reject Docetism and to understand that the real Jesus was fully human, suffered, and died. It's kind of the opposite problem that we have today, it seems, in that many people believe, of course, Jesus was just an ordinary human being who was born, lived, and died, and suffered under the Romans. There's historical records that prove this. But the claim that he was the Son of God, well, that's a theological opinion, not based in any reality. That would be the opposite view that Ignatius is trying to deal with here. Here, there were people who had no trouble believing in the divinity of the Son of God. They just didn't believe he was fully human. Kind of the absolute opposite problem that many people face today as they try to explain to others how it could be that Jesus was both fully human and fully divine. Well, the letter to the Trallians closes with the typical kinds of concerns that we've read at the end of both Ephesians and Magnesians. He mentions his chains, his being in prison, which he carries around for the sake of Jesus Christ, in his desire to attain to God or to get to God. Because of his status as a potential martyr, as an authoritative church leader, he urges the Christians in Tralles to stay united and to pray for one another and encourage their bishop, to be supportive of the bishop, to follow him, to not cause trouble for the bishop or for the church in general in Tralles. At the end of chapter 12, he says, "Pray for me. By God's mercy, I need your love if I'm going to deserve the fate I long for." So it is true that Ignatius wants to be a martyr. He longs for that. Maybe this is a wrong ambition he has. He's a bit concerned about that. Other people come and tell him he's a hero for wanting to be a martyr. But he does want to die for the faith. He wants to remain faithful to the very end and not give in and claim that he's not really a Christian so that he can avoid suffering. He will refuse to offer incense to the emperor as to a god. He will say that he does not believe in the gods of the Romans. And so not to believe in them is to be, from a Roman point of view, disloyal and treasonous to the empire, because the gods of the empire are the guardians of the fate and well-being of the Roman Empire, and are personified, those gods, in the person of the emperor himself. So not to offer sacrifice to the emperor as to a divine being is absolutely treasonous, unpatriotic from a Roman point of view. And the Christians are refusing to do this and are paying for it with their lives. He wants to be held strong enough so that he can deserve the fate he longs for and not prove a castaway. That is, not prove reprobate in the end, not to give up his faith so that he can save his life. He wants to die for Christ. In closing, he brings greetings from the Smyrnians and the Ephesians, maybe also from the Magnesians. He urges them to submit to their bishop and their presbytery, to love one another with an undivided heart. He thinks he is dying not only for himself and for God, but he's giving his life for them as well. And he will continue to think that, he says, when I shall finally get to God. Well, he wants the Christians in Tralles to be well, to be faithful, to be obedient to their local church leader, and not to cause conflict among themselves and cause disrepute then for other Christians. Well, so we're seeing some of the same themes in this letter to the Trallians as we have in the two previous letters to Ephesus and Magnesia. Because of the repetitious nature of these letters, in that he's writing some of the same things every time to each church, we've decided in the in-person group to try something different. And that is to read two letters next. So I am asking you to read the letter to the Romans and then to the Philadelphians, the next two letters that Ignatius writes to these churches that he has a relationship with. So we're going to try to take two letters because the themes, and then compare them, because the themes we think are going to be very similar to the themes that we've seen already. And we don't want to just be repeating ourselves 7 times as we read the 7 letters. Let's see what we find if we read 2 letters and highlight the main themes in each one, rather than trying to make our way through each letter over 7 weeks. So anyway, we're going to try that. It may not work. It may be that we'll spend all our time on Romans and not get to Philadelphians. But let's try it and take these 2 letters together and compare them and see if the themes continue to be similar to the themes we've already run into in these first 3 letters. Well, thank you for being part of the Monday study group. Thank you for receiving this video in a different form than you're used to. I'm glad the computer has worked here in Michelle's office in our house here in Oak Harbor, Washington. And I will try to see what I can do to get my own computers up and working. It seemed to have been an internet problem, but Michelle's computer did not have the internet problem I had. So be well, take care. I'll check in with you next week. And in the meantime, I'll send you some study questions on both the letter to the Romans and the Philadelphians in our quest to see what themes Ignatius continues to emphasize. Take care. Thanks be to God.